We were talking about this last time. We were talking about how the drugs affect different neurotransmitters. Alcohol, of course, directly affects GABA, and we're going to talk about alcohol and GABA when we talk about alcohol. Metenkephalin and serotonin. One of the problems with alcohol is that when you drink, it increases your serotonin level in your brain, which seems like it's a good idea, but the problem is, if you've ever been around a drunk, when they're drunk they may be happy, but when they're not drunk they're really unhappy. And the reason is because it increases serotonin level. In order to protect itself, the brain, of course, downregulates serotonin receptor sites, and now when they're not drunk, they're grouchy. And that's a problem as well. That can be a problem as well. Benzodiazepines directly affect GABA and glycine. Marijuana affects anandamide, acetylcholine, dynorphin, and arachidonyl glycerol, or 2-AG. So marijuana, of course, has something to do with movement, has to do with memory. It has a lot to do with memory.
Yeah.
It really screws up your short-term memory. And it also gives you the munchies, and the reason it gives you the munchies is because of the anandamide receptor site. Anandamide tells you when you're satiated. As long as the marijuana is inhabiting that receptor site, you think you're hungry, and so people get the munchies. It takes the pain away. Marijuana does. That's what the dynorphin affects, as weird as that is. So there you go. You've got memory, you've got feelings of satiation, and you've got pain. So it helps your pain, helps take your pain away. You can't remember anything, and you want to eat all the time. Heroin affects the endorphin receptor site, the enkephalin receptor site, and dopamine. So it makes you feel good, it makes you feel euphoric, but it also takes pain away. Makes you forget that you're in pain, is what it actually does, as weird as that is.
So it kind of just numbs the system.
Yeah. LSD affects acetylcholine, dopamine, and serotonin. Serotonin, because of all of these things, especially the acetylcholine, a lot of people who take LSD have flashbacks. About 25% of the people that take LSD have flashbacks. What they're flashing back to is the memory of their trip, whatever kind of a trip they took. If they were happy when it started, then they'll have a good trip, and of course they can go back to that point. If you're walking along and you see a flashing light that is very similar to what you saw when you were on the trip, you'll start having your trip from that point, as weird as that is. It's a memory trace, so you'll have exactly the same memory. It's kind of like having a dream, having the same dream over and over and over again. So that's why, but of course you're awake at this point, and those are known as flashbacks. Nicotine affects epinephrine, endorphins, and acetylcholine. Nicotine is a vasoconstrictor. There's lots and lots of problems with nicotine. One of the problems is that it makes your platelets sticky, so that your blood clots relatively easily if you're smoking cigarettes. The endorphins, of course, it seems to take pain away, and the other thing is that it actually helps your memory, and nicotine does. So if you smoke cigarettes and study at the same time, then potentially you'll remember more things. Cocaine and amphetamines affect dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and acetylcholine, and we'll talk more about the acetylcholine or the cocaine and amphetamines in just a second. You can see it affects a lot of neurotransmitters, and because of that, it can make you feel psychotic. It blocks the reuptake of norepinephrine. If you remember
for norepinephrine, it makes you feel like you're on top of the world. Like you can do anything. Gives you a feeling of well-being. Well, if you have a lot of this stuff in your system, then all of a sudden it makes you psychotic. It makes you feel like you can conquer the world. And that's what happens with people on cocaine. Cocaine, when you first start using it, cocaine and amphetamines, when you first start using it, it acts as a aphrodisiac. After a while, it doesn't work like that anymore. You can have a prolonged erection. The problem is that you have a hard time orgasming. So one of the things that happens with people that take cocaine and they use it as an aphrodisiac, if they've used it over an extended period of time, they will become impotent. They can have sex, but they can't orgasm. I had a girlfriend who called me on the phone. She said her boyfriend didn't orgasm, and we discussed what was going on. He was a long distance truck driver, and he would drop amphetamines, and so he'd been doing this for an extended length of time, and because of that he couldn't. He had lost his ability to have an orgasm, which was kind of odd. She wanted to have a baby and she couldn't. They could have sex, and of course, they could have sex for a prolonged period of time, but he just wouldn't orgasm. There was no way that she could bring him to orgasm because of it. MDA and MDMA increase your serotonin level, your dopamine level, your epinephrine and norepinephrine level. It looks like it's very similar to cocaine, but the structure is very similar to amphetamines. The difference is that there's an excess amount of serotonin, and so you get the feeling that you want to hug everybody, that everybody loves you, that kind of an odd situation. PCP, dopamine, increase your dopamine, acetylcholine, and alpha cytosine level.
What is alpha?
We didn't even talk about this. Alpha endocytosine. I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. Sorry.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I would have to look it up too. And I did before class. Neurotransmitters attach themselves to receptor cells on the receiving entity, the muscles, the organs, whatever other neuron you're dealing with, that are chemically structured to only accept that neurotransmitter. However, select receptor sites may have different functions for the same neurotransmitter. There are 7 types of serotonin receptors, each of which has a slightly different function. Some make you happy, some will inhibit your sexual response. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to serotonin. Dopamine has 5 types of receptor sites, when we're talking about dopamine, we annotate them D1 through D5. It's the D2 receptor site that is used by most of the psychoactive substances. So when we're talking about dopamine and how it affects you, we're probably talking about the D2 receptor site. Each neuron maintains and transmits only one type of neurotransmitter, except for neurons that transmit epinephrine, which may also transmit norepinephrine. And for the longest time, we thought that norepinephrine and epinephrine were the same thing. But then we realized that there were 2 totally different things, and they did 2 totally different. They had two totally different effects. Initially, they were going to call it epinephrine 1 and epinephrine 2, but that didn't. They were so opposite that they figured out that they had a kind of a different configuration, chemical configuration. However, a neuron may have receptor sites for any number of neurotransmitters. So most neurons can be either stimulated by a different number of neurotransmitters. A neuron is stimulated when it receives enough neurotransmitter to create a chemical imbalance in the neuron that forces sodium and potassium gates to open. The increase of positively charged sodium and potassium ions from outside the neuron, and the flooding out of negatively charged chloride ions causes an electrical chain reaction to run down the neuron in the axon terminal. We talked about this before. We talk about this in practically every class. It has to do with sodium and chloride, sodium and potassium are the positive charged particles. The negative charged particles are chloride. What are we talking about here? We're talking about salt, okay, salt water. At the axon terminal, the electrical stimulation causes the vesicles to release their neurotransmitter into the synaptic cleft, which in turn stimulates the partner neuron, yada, 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 everything fires. Excitatory neurotransmitters work by opening sodium gates, allowing sodium into the neuron, and because it's a positively charged ion, it makes it positively charged, and then of course we have a chemical reaction. We have actually electrochemical reaction with all those positive charges. The inhibitory neurotransmitters work by opening chloride gates, making the neuron more negative, and thus making it more difficult to stimulate. We just make it more negatively charged. The stimulation of the neuron by the neurotransmitter is known as the first messenger system. Now remember, each neuron has different types of receptor sites. The first neurotransmitter that affects that neuron is the first messenger system. If the neuron is stimulated by another entity, such as a biological or a chemical change, it is known as a second messenger system, a secondary messenger system, and this is how a lot of pharmaceuticals work.
Yeah.
It will stimulate, it'll be stimulated by one chemical in the pharmaceutical, and that will be the first messenger, so that we can get to the second messenger system. This one has to stimulate before this one does. So a lot of times, that's what happens with blood pressure medication. Oh, there you go. Beta blockers.
Like Prazosin?
I don't know that one. Do you know that medication?
It's really meant for like blood pressure,
Okay,
but they gave it to me for flashbacks at during the night.
okay.
What is that called?
Prazosin?
Presolin?
Prazosin. It's a, see if I get the technical term. They're smarter than me.
I don't think we carry that. I don't think we have.
Then they juiced you up with just about
Yeah, it's
everything.
a alpha blocker.
Oh, it's an alpha blocker.
It's a, yeah, it's for blood pressure, but yeah, they said that they, for nightmares too.
For nightmares.
It's mini press, it is, to be the,
Oh, okay. I've heard of mini press.
yeah, it's
Okay.
pretty much the same thing.
Okay. Okay. Blood pressure medication. It's an alpha. Instead of a beta blocker, it's an alpha blocker.
Yeah.
The neurotransmitter can't remain in the synaptic cleft, the reaction wouldn't stop. We have to break down the neurotransmitter one way or the other. There's two ways to break down the neurotransmitter. One is with a chemical enzyme. In the case of acetylcholine, it's broken up by acetylcholinesterase, which is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. Once we break it down, of course, now it's non-functional and it can't affect the neurotransmitter, or it can't affect the neuron. The other way is to just take it back up into the neuron that is distributing it, and that is known as reuptake. That's how selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that's how they work. Instead of, they don't allow the reuptake of the serotonin, leaving more serotonin into the system. How long does it take to get?
What does the word tonin mean?
Serotonin?
No, tonin.
Tonin?
There's melatonin, there's serotonin, there are all these tonins. What does
It means
tonin
hormone. It means, it's the ending for a hormone, or for something that a chemical that affects something.
Oh, okay.
Okay. That's a good question. I never even
I
thought
don't know,
about
it's
that.
got all these tonings and it's gotta be
Yeah,
something.
come on, you guys, everything rhymes. The number of receptor sites is not constant. When the amount of neurotransmitters, we've talked about this before, when you take a chemical, it's a toxin, of course. The human body is trying to regulate itself, it's trying to balance itself. So if you put too much of a toxin into your system, the neurons, in order to protect themselves, to keep from being destroyed, they will reduce the amount of receptor sites so they don't become overexcited. The first time you take a drug, of course, your neurons are not ready for it, and some of those neurons will be overexcited to the extent that it will destroy them. So that this doesn't happen over and over and over again, it will reduce the number of receptor sites, and this is known as downregulation. If you're depressed and you don't want to be depressed, of course your body doesn't want to be depressed anymore. That's not a positive, balanced way to be. Your brain will increase the number of receptor sites for serotonin because you want to be happy, and this is one of the reasons why people don't just stay in a state for an extended length of time, a negative state. It's really difficult to be depressed all the time. It doesn't work that way because the human brain wants to be fixed. Yeah, it wants to be balanced. It needs to be balanced. It wants to feel like everything's okay. So one of the things that will happen is that your neurons will upregulate the number of receptor sites for serotonin and norepinephrine. They're seeking a positive feeling. They're looking for that. And this is one of the reasons that anxiety, of course, doesn't last for an extended length of time. If you have a panic attack, it's not a constant panic attack. You recover from it. And one of the reasons you recover from it is because your body is pumping more GABA into your system to alleviate that feeling of panic. So panic attacks will only last for 10 or 15 minutes, or 5 or 10 minutes. It can't last for an extended length of time. It's a toxic state, and the brain cannot handle that. It doesn't want to handle that.
Yeah.
The same thing happens in combat. The first time you're in combat, you're scared. You don't know what to do. Of course, they've trained you to do what you're supposed to do. But for the first 3 or 4 minutes, as rounds are coming in, you're hunkered down and you don't want to move. And then all of a sudden, you feel better and you do what you're supposed to do. This is very common. This is something that we have seen in combat over an extended length of time. The person that was the coward in the beginning, of course, he's not really a coward, he's just scared. He will recover and he will start doing what he's been trained to do.
How about people that, how would you say, like people that have anxiety?
Anxiety?
Yeah.
They're overly anxious.
Yeah, like I've noticed a lot of people that constantly say that, like on a daily basis, and I'm just,
Right.
And I feel like they tend to let that part of their body control their positive side of their emotions.
But they really don't, do they? They only have that anxiety at select moments. The rest of the time they're okay. I mean, otherwise they'd be curled up in the corner. But they're not curled up in the corner.
Oh, I hope not when they're not here.
I mean, they're not able, if they were non-functional because of their anxiety, they would be completely non-functional. But obviously they're not, because they go out and they do things. They become paranoid.
So in any situation, like any situation besides anxiety, it always just finds a way to balance itself.
Exactly. Well, the anxiety does too. If you talk to somebody who is overly anxious, they're not overly anxious all the time. They're just overly anxious when they think about select circumstances. And they can't think about it. And what their brain will do is their brain will make them not think about that, so that they're not non-functional. I mean, we all need to be functional.
Yeah.
So it has to do with upregulation and downregulation. We're looking for a balance. And that's one of the reasons why the human brain has a difficult time staying depressed for an extended length of time.
Can this be like a topic for our paper, like the neurochemistry?
Sure,
Okay,
that would be a good one.
I know. I like it.
No, I'm excited. Psychoactive drugs work because they act as either agonists or antagonists. Agonists mimic or facilitate the effects of neurotransmitters, of the neurotransmitter nicotine, acetylcholine, and that's one of the reasons why it's a good memory drug, nicotine is. Alcohol affects GABA, LSD is serotonin, and THC is anandamide. If this happens partially, it is known as a partial agonist. In other words, it increases the effects of the acetylcholine, the GABA, or the serotonin, and that's known as an agonist. It mimics it. It increases the effect of GABA, serotonin, anandamide, and acetylcholine. An antagonist blocks the neurotransmitter. If the receptor is stabilized, making it inactive by a drug, the drug is referred to as an inverse agonist, but an antagonist will block the neurotransmitter, and that's how they work. Of course, a lot of pharmaceuticals are antagonistic pharmaceuticals. Most of your blood pressure medicines are antagonistic pharmaceuticals. How drugs affect neurotransmitters, they can block the release of neurotransmitters. Heroin blocks the release of substance P. They could force the release of neurotransmitters, forcing more to be released than is released naturally. This is what cocaine does. It forces the release of norepinephrine and dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel good. Norepinephrine gives you a feeling of well-being. Of course, you're getting an excess amount of this, and you can imagine if you get too much of this, then you feel psychotic. I mean, literally, it makes you feel psychotic. Ecstasy forces the release of serotonin. Serotonin in itself makes you feel good, but if you have an excess amount of this, what happens next? Well, you start hugging everybody. You have this feeling, oh, it's really kind of interesting. Have you ever been to a rave? People
Yeah, make my money and leave, that's it.
People are wandering around hugging each other and
It's a
chewing.
love fest.
A love fest. Well, but it's not a sex fest.
No, I know,
It's-
it's like a
yeah.
embracing each
Yeah.
other. Yeah.
They just want to hug everybody. It's really kind of weird. It actually, now think about this. This is an increase in serotonin. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that regulates your testosterone level. So if you have an excess amount of serotonin, you don't have any sexual response. You lose your sexual response, as strange as that is. So while they're wandering around hugging each other, they're really not having sex. They can't have sex. They have no sexual response. It's increased their serotonin level. They can't do it. It just doesn't make any sense. A male won't be able to have an erection. A female won't have a sex drive. So raves are not orgies. Raves are love fests in essence. They just want to hug each other, as strange as that may seem. The drug can prevent the reabsorption of the neurotransmitter. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors block the reuptake of serotonin, which elevates the person's mood. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks for it to kick in, for the level to be high enough so that it affects your brain. The drugs can inhibit an enzyme that helps synthesize the neurotransmitter. Blood pressure medicines inhibit enzymes that allow the production of norepinephrine, which would cause high blood pressure if allowed to be released in the synaptic cleft, so it blocks your norepinephrine level. Now, this is one of the problems with some blood pressure medications. Since it blocks norepinephrine, that's your feeling of well-being. And since you're not getting very much norepinephrine into your system, now you don't feel very good. You don't feel like you're okay. as strange as that may seem. And of course, blood pressure medication can also block, okay, so it blocks your norepinephrine level, so you don't have as much norepinephrine in your system. Some individuals become impotent when they take blood pressure medication because it it decreases their norepinephrine levels since they don't feel good about themselves. Now all of a sudden they can't have sex anymore. Right? This happens especially with males. I had an uncle that was on blood pressure medication. He wanted to have sex with his wife. So he asked my mother's a nurse, so he asked my mother if he could go off his blood pressure medicine. And she said, sure, just be sure and go back on it after you do the dirty deed. They were in their 70s, I think. Anyway, so he went off the blood pressure medicine. Evidently they had sex, and it was so good that he decided to stay off the blood pressure medicine. And of course, he died of a stroke not very long after that. And my mother said, well, that's okay. It's all right. He died happy. I don't know. It was a thing that he felt like he had to do in order to be a whole person.
Isn't that how a lot of people are, though? Like when people have cancer, they rather just be, well, just in any situation that's life-threatening, but people tend to want to be happy than to go through all that.
Right. Yeah, some people choose not to go through chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is destructive. It's a real severe toxin.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
What does it do to the chemotherapy?
Oh, geez,
I see people, I mean, they lose their hair, it's
Right.
terrible, man.
Yeah, it usually has to do with that is a side effect of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is like, in order for you to kill the cancer, you have to almost kill the person. And that's what chemotherapy does.
It's radiation, right?
It just about kills you. It's that debilitating. It destroys your mucous membrane. It actually does destroy your mucous membrane. And for that reason, of course, your mouth is raw, your anus is raw, so anytime you defecate, it's excruciatingly painful. But it needs to do, your body needs to get to this point so that the cancer will die. The cancer is being fed and is being fed by your body, so you need to.
So instead of the cancer killing you, the chemo might kill you.
Yeah, the
That's to
chemo.
prevent the cancer. It doesn't
Chemo
make
very
sense.
frequently does, not frequently, I guess it's not that frequently. We're really good at it now. In the beginning, of course, we were just, wiping people out pretty much with the
Yeah,
chemotherapy.
my grandma went through that in, I think the mid to late 70s.
Yeah,
It was probably rough as hell for her.
it was worse back then, a lot worse. We didn't really know what we were doing. We couldn't regulate it nearly as well as we do today. So, yeah, I apologize for medicine for torturing your grandmother. I apologize for that. But we were right at the beginning of that was the only cure that we had.
When did it start?
What, chemotherapy?
Really?
Well, they had chemotherapy back in the 50s.
That must have been kind of scary.
Well,
But I mean, it's radiation to the body.
well, radiation is another type of therapy. Chemotherapy is where you inject them with toxins, with chemical toxins that hopefully destroy the cancer.
The cancer, yeah.
But it destroys the body at the same time.
There's a 50-50 chance.
No, it's better than that.
Does
It's
it
more like
depend whether or not they catch it in time?
60-40, 70-30. It really all depends on the cancer. I mean, there are pancreatic cancer, for example. It's almost impossible to treat pancreatic cancer. Lung cancer, what do you do with lung cancer? Well, you can't treat it with chemotherapy. You have to use surgery. You have to cut out the lungs. That's what happened with John Wayne. John Wayne had lung cancer because he smoked all the time. And they took out one of his lungs. And they took out part of the other lung. So he was breathing with, you know, a third of what he was, of the lung mass that he was supposed to have.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, brain cancer, you know, brain cancer, you can treat it with radiation, you can treat it with chemotherapy. Are you gonna be able to knock it out? That's,
What did McCain go through?
McCain had brain cancer. He had glioblastoma,
Yeah.
yeah,
What's
glioblastoma.
that?
Oh.
I just know he had that, but I never looked into it either.
Yeah. Glioblastoma is, how can I explain this? It has to do with blood vessels in your brain, and the blood vessels become cancerous. So you can take some of them out. I mean, you can do surgery if it's close to the surface of your brain. And in his case, they went through his eye socket. I know this sounds.
Yeah, so there really wasn't a surgery you could really do, huh?
Well, it was relatively close to the surface, so they got it the first time, but the problem with glioblastoma is that it tends to spread. Once it starts spreading, if you can catch cancer soon enough, you can usually eradicate it, because you can cut it out. But once it metastasizes, once it moves from its original spot to another place in the body, you know, now you're treating cancers all over the body, and it's really difficult to knock out. That's what happened with Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong developed testicular cancer. Now, testicular cancer normally just stays right there, but his metastasized into his brain. So they were treating him with all kinds of toxic chemicals. And they cut out the testicular cancer. They were able to do surgery to knock out that, but then they were fighting this brain cancer. But luckily, his brain cancer was easily treated with chemotherapy. You know, it had metastasized, and luckily it had just gone into his brain. So they were able to eradicate it by cutting out the testicular cancer and then treating the brain cancer with chemotherapy. I know, it's strange. So once it metastasizes, it's like all bets are off. Your immune system will help you initially with the original cancer. It'll help you. But once it metastasizes, it like becomes stealth cancer, because it starts using a substance known as human chorionic gonadotropin, which is a substance that babies will use to keep their mother's immune system from attacking them. They will produce this masking substance known as human chorionic gonadotropin. And that's what happens with metastasized cancer. It starts producing this human chorionic gonadotropin, and so you don't know that your immune system doesn't know it's there. So the only way to knock it out is to use chemotherapy, radiation, or whatever. And sometimes that's just not possible. One of the reasons that breast cancer is so deadly is because breast cancer is not only in the breast, then it spreads to the lymph nodes, and once it gets into the lymph nodes, well, kinda, yeah. That's one of the reasons why when they do breast surgery for breast cancer, they take off the whole breast, and they'll take out the lymph nodes up right underneath it, in the armpits. So that's one of the reasons they do radical mastectomies, as ugly as that is. Yeah, cancer's a tough one. Cancer's really tough. And that's and they're all different. So, you know, the glioblastoma has to do with blood vessels. And what the blood vessels in your brain are you know, very coordinated. But you get a glioblastoma, and all of a sudden you get this tangle of blood vessels in your brain that it's a cancer of blood vessels. So the only thing you can do is go in there and pull those out and try to reattach them so that you don't lose portions of your brain. That's what they did with McCain, and it was successful. And he lived for another year, year and a half, but then it came back.
He
And
was
once,
just done,
yeah, once it came back, then it was pretty much all over with. You can do it once, but you can't really do it twice. They used to be the same way with heart attacks. You could go in and do a heart cath and repair a heart once or twice, but you couldn't do it the third time. The third time it was just, there was just too much damage being done. But now they can do it 3, 4, 5 times. I've had 3 heart caths myself. I know. They wouldn't have done that, years ago, but
Yeah.
now they can. I can't remember what I'm talking about. Okay, I think I'm done with that slide.
Yeah.
Drugs can inhibit enzymes that break down neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft, allowing the neurotransmitter to remain in the cleft. Methamphetamines inhibits monoamine oxidase and catechol-O methyltransferase, which break down norepinephrine and epinephrine in the synaptic cleft. Of course, it leaves it out. It leaves more of this stuff in there because it inhibits the monoamine oxidase and the catechol-O methyltransferase, dumbest name in the world, leaving more norepinephrine and epinephrine in the system. Now, of course, epinephrine and norepinephrine increase your blood pressure. So that's one of the things that methamphetamines do. The drug can interfere with the storage of the neurotransmitter. The drug can do a combination of many of these interactions. While some drugs have desired effects like making the individual resist fatigue or block pain, they can also be dangerous. Cocaine forces the release of norepinephrine and dopamine, which makes the individual not only stay up beyond normal exhaustion, but responds in an overly excited and sometimes violent manner. And this is one of the problems with cocaine. Now, remember, some people use this as an aphrodisiac. But they develop a tolerance to cocaine, so they have to snort more in order to get the same effect that they got before. And sometimes this leads to violent behavior. So if an individual is using cocaine as an aphrodisiac, pretty soon he becomes a very violent lover. He becomes violent with his sexual response. And the violence is the only way that he can become excited now. So this is really quite dangerous. Some individuals who use cocaine as an aphrodisiac, they become sexually abusive, demanding more and more strange and odd sexual responses from their partner. Heroin blocks pain and creates a euphoric sensation by attaching receptor sites in the reward reinforcement pathway, but unfortunately also attaches to the breathing center, depressing respiration. And of course, if you overdose on heroin, then you stop breathing. And once you stop breathing, you're dead. You've got 3 to 5 minutes to get oxygen to your brain. If that breathing center is depressed too much. Now, the interesting thing about breathing is that not only are you breathing through your lungs, but your skin is also breathing. So sometimes you can't detect that the person is breathing, but they're still alive. I got a call this morning from I don't lose my ID card, I won't be able to copy anything. Okay, so yeah, and this is a really serious problem if you're not breathing anymore. But your skin is still breathing. And if you remember Pulp Fiction, he thought she was dead. Of course, she wasn't dead, but she was absorbing oxygen through her skin, potentially. So despite the fact that he couldn't detect the fact that she was breathing, she was probably still getting oxygen into her system.
And then he stabbed her.
And this doesn't last for very long. I mean, you're not really taking that much oxygen in, but you can stay alive even though your respirations are really quite shallow. LSD acts as both a stimulatory neurotransmitter and alters the user's perception of external messages, mixing their perceptions so that they may hear images and see sounds, as weird as that is. This is known as synesthesia. And this is very common with LSD. This is one of those mind-expanding drugs that they talk about. Now they're starting to treat people with psilocybin, which is also a hallucinogen. We've used LSD in the past to treat individuals, especially with individuals who have depression that we can't touch with anything else. Cary Grant was treated with LSD in the 1950s when he was in his 40s. Cary Grant always was depressed for an extended length of time. His problem was that he was pretty. And he knew he was pretty, but he didn't think he could act. So he started being...
And low self-esteem pretty much.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It was a low self-esteem. He was afraid he's going to lose his good looks. If he ever lost his good looks, would he lose his personality? He had low self-esteem most of his life, as weird as that seems. He was born in poverty in England. What he had to do to survive, he never really said, but evidently it was fairly extreme. What he had to do in order to be accepted. He was a acrobat, so he was, very physically fit. Almost all of his life, he was physically fit, but he had this low self-esteem because he was afraid he'd lose his good looks. So as he was aging and starting to wrinkle and whatnot, he became very, very depressed. And they treated him with LSD and in several different sessions, and he was able to come back. They're starting to do the same thing with psilocybin, as I said before. This is a new thing. The idea is that it's mind expanding. Our thinking pattern is kind of limited. So what psilocybin and LSD do, they expand the bounds of our thinking process. Does it work? Well, yeah, it seems to work, especially with people with low self-esteem. Other psychedelics block the action of acetylcholine, creating hallucinations. And of course, LSD uses serotonin. The body may deal with drugs in several different ways. It may develop a tolerance. You may become tissue dependent, like alcohol and heroin. Psychologically dependent, like marijuana and cocaine. You may go through withdrawal symptoms. You may, of course, your body is always trying to neutralize the toxin, and it may break down the drug in the liver through metabolism. Any foreign substance will be treated as a toxin in the body. If it's not food, then it's a toxin. It's something that needs to be eradicated. The liver and the kidneys will try to eliminate it so that it cannot do any damage. If the individual continues to use the substance, the body will adapt to having the drug present in the system. The more you put in your system, of course, the more likely that your body will accept it as a substance that will be there in the future, sometime in the future. This adaptation to the presence of a toxin is called tolerance. So the first time you drank alcohol, I'm sure you can't remember if either of you ever, I know Scott drank alcohol, you were drinking a fifth of
Hennessy a day.
That's a lot of
That's a
alcohol.
lot of alcohol.
That's a lot of alcohol.
Seen lettuce.
But can you remember the first time you had a beer?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
okay.
was 11.
You were 11. So did you get drunk? You probably felt it.
I don't know, it's
Can't
over
even
20 years
remember
ago.
it, okay.
It's like over 20 years ago, man.
Yeah, I know. Well, to the extent that you drank until you could drink a fifth of
Is
his.
that why like some people get like, I guess you call it liquor sick?
Yeah,
To where if they don't have it, then they'll just.
right, that's the tissue dependence.
Just feel like shit.
Yeah,
They actually need it to live.
exactly. That's tissue dependence. Did you ever get to that point?
No, I mean, after drinking that much for so long, I don't get, I guess, the details, but I mean, after about a week, doing PT and everything, I was good, and I was just back to work.
Sure, and you use the exercise to dissipate
Man,
the
but-
toxic effects.
At the weekend, you could tell, cause I mean, it's our measure, be like, dang, someone had a good weekend. Especially like all us drank together,
Sure.
cause all that stuff sweats out.
Right.
Man, it's like a brewery going by,
I
man.
can imagine. Tolerance to, yeah, because that's another way that you dissipate the alcohol. Tolerance to drugs will force the individual to take more and more of the drug to get the same effect. And of course, Scott was talking about drinking a fifth of Hennessy a day. Methamphetamine users will achieve a certain level of euphoria and energy the first time that they use it. And of course, they're always chasing the dragon, they're always chasing the first effect they ever had. If they use every day for 100 days, by the 100th day, they will build up a tolerance for the drug that will necessitate a 20 times increase on the amount used the first time. And this is one of the reasons why, if a pusher is out there, he'll give you the drug the first time. And maybe he'll give you the drug the second time.
Yeah, but then you pay double next time.
Well, I don't know about the paying double, but pretty soon you're using so much of this stuff that he's already made his money back. Of course, he's kicked up the price, yeah, depending on who you are. I'm sure every time I buy a rug,
Shoot, that bought me my first car.
look at this. Look how they've changed over time. This is after 2.5 years, the lady had aged markedly. Like, this guy's got sores all over his body.
Does it like, I know because it's dope, speed, but does it like actually like, it quickens the, I guess, aging process?
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. It accelerates the aging process.
Dang, look at that, she was 20, now she's like 50.
Looks like she's 50, exactly. In order for tolerance to occur, sometimes the drug must be taken irresponsibly. If the individual is taking Valium at a higher dose than the doctor prescribes, or the doctor is prescribing heavy usage of the medication, this is of course what happened with Michael Jackson. His doctor was giving him way more than he should have been giving him, and that's the reason the doctor's in jail right now, because of malpractice. The tolerance, of course, will be accelerated. I think he died of, did he inject him with some kind of fentanyl, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what killed him. Research shows that there are individuals who have built up a tolerance to the degree that they are using 100 to 200 times the standard dosage. And you can build up that kind of tolerance. People that have been taking Valium for 5 or 6 years, they're taking really, really high doses. And this is one of the reasons. Every time they come in, they've jacked up. They start out at, I don't know, 20 milligrams, and now they're at 100 or whatever. I don't know how Valium is used. Tolerance will return to normal if the drug is no longer used. So they can become normal, but they have to.
What is Valium?
Well,
What is Valium?
Valium, it's an anti-anxiety drug. It's a sedative. It kind of makes you feel.
One day didn't put me on.
It knocks you out.
Yeah, it's a benzodiazepine. There's several different types of tolerance. Dispositional tolerance, the body accelerates the metabolism of the drug by producing more of the enzyme used to metabolize a toxic substance. The more people drink alcohol, the greater their tolerance because of dispositional tolerance. Thus, the individual will have to consume high levels of alcohol to become intoxicated. If you've ever been to a bar over a period of time, you see this with the patrons coming into the bar. The first time they came in, a couple beers, and they were doing okay. Pretty soon, they've got it down, 4 or 5 beers before they start feeling it. And that is
We had
dispositional.
a tab, there was a bar right outside of Fort Lewis, right?
Uh,
And, I mean, we all did the same shit. For us, we needed to get drunk just to forget. Our tab, between 7 guys, was almost $400 freaking dollars.
Oh, jeez. That's 7 alcoholics that we're dealing with here.
Hey,
$400 for the booze? Okay, that's a lot of booze.
Well, they use food too,
Oh, yeah,
but
that's,
pretty soon we're just buying bottles of the freaking thing.
sure. We had the same problem in the Air Force. When I first join the Air Force, you had to join, you had to be a member of the NCO club. If you were an NCO, you had to be a member of the NCO club. There were they had a lot of problems with alcoholics. Now, you don't want you don't want an alcoholic fixing your airplane, because that airplane may not get fixed and the plane may crash. So the Air Force realized that they had a really serious problem. So they kind of changed the lifestyle, the mindset of the Air Force to a more family-friendly situation. They also had problems with military members being abusive. And of course, what do? You know, you're the one that told them that they had to drink, so they kind of changed everything. By the time my wife got out of the service, the Air Force was trying to talk people into not drinking rather than supporting the alcoholism that they were supporting before, forcing people to join the clubs and whatnot. When I became an NCO, they said that, okay, you have to go over, in order to get your stripe, you have to go over and join the NCO club. That was one of the deals. And if you're a member of the NCO club, well, you had to go in every week and buy 2 drinks to be a member in good standing. Now, for most people, that's just, 2 drinks, that's 2 beers, no sweat. But I didn't drink.
I don't want to be in NCO club. Like, man, it's past work. Bring on these
But
guys.
see, that was part of the whole system. And if you didn't support the NCO club, then the NCO club would close. That was the deal. So
Go
initially.
to class 6. It's probably cheaper anyways.
Well, they were trying to make it part of the system so that they could keep the clubs open. And then they could use the clubs to, if you had a party, then it could be at the NCO club, or it could be at the officers club. And then they changed the whole mindset.
Now, I've been there.
What, the officers
The
club?
officers club.
Yeah.
My commander, he brought 4 of us in. He goes, come on, he doesn't shoot at me. We're all, I'm not even supposed to be in here. He goes, I don't do shit. Okay, I'm a freaking full bird. Let's go. You know, big enough fire with a freaking full bird,
Yeah.
you know? And I think it was just 2 people in there that I ranked him. There's a 1-star and a 2-star.
Wow.
They didn't care, they were
Is that
blitzed
Fort
anyway.
Lewis? Is that a Fort
Huh?
Lewis?
Fort Hood.
Yeah. Oh, Fort Hood.
Yeah. The one who used to run Fort Hood when I was there, he's now top Army guy
Yeah.
in DC.
So he's on the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
No, he is the Army.
Yeah, he is the Army guy.
Yeah.
Pharmacodynamic tolerance affected nerve cells become less sensitive to the drug. When opioids are used, neurons begin generating fewer receptors to the opioid to lessen its effects. That's a downregulation we were talking about before. The body will also produce cholecystokinin as an antagonist to the drug. So the body tries to control the toxins, and it will do it by downregulation. It will also do it by producing its own chemical that blocks the opioid. And this is one of the problems with opioid addiction, is not only is your body trying to downregulate so you're less sensitive to it, but it's also producing chemicals that block it, that are antagonists to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is people with a gallbladder. That's where cholecystokinin comes from. So if you don't have a gallbladder, you become you have a worse effect when you take your opioids. As weird as that sounds. So what do they give you for after you have have gallbladder surgery? They give you an opioid to take care of it, and of course you have an adverse reaction to the opioid because you don't have the cholecystokinin in your system. You can't produce it because you don't have a gallbladder to
That
produce.
sounds German.
What?
It sounds like a German word.
What, cholecystokinin? No,
Doesn't it say fast?
It's actually
Sounds like
Greek.
German. Really?
Yeah, it's just Greek. It's just a Greek word.
Hmm.
Behavioral tolerance, the brain compensates for the effects of the drug by using parts of the brain not affected. This is what happens with alcohol. If you've ever been around somebody that's really drunk, sometimes, if they have to, it's a guy and he meets a girl and he wants to impress her, but he's drunk, so all of a sudden, he doesn't seem drunk anymore. Or he gets stopped by the cops and he doesn't want to seem drunk. His brain can actually, it will go to a part of the brain that isn't affected yet. Because remember, when you drink alcohol, it starts off in your frontal cortex and it wanders its way down to your cerebellum. So there are parts of your brain that aren't affected by the alcohol. And they can reroute their thought processes through that non-drunk area of the brain.
But if you're too lit, you can't. Huh?
Well, if it goes all the way to your cerebellum, you're done anyway. You can barely move.
Can't walk the line.
Well, it's your tongue. If you sound drunk, of course, they're gonna know you're drunk. So what they do is they try to, there are different parts of your brain that control movement. Your cerebellum controls it, and your occipital lobe controls it. That's not right. Parietal lobe controls it. Parietal lobe, this part right here. So if your parietal lobe is inebriated, you can process the information through your cerebellum rather than your parietal lobe. So that you don't sound drunk anymore. All of a sudden you don't sound drunk anymore, and it's because you are forcing this portion of your brain to do move your tongue.
Until you get the breathalyzer.
Well,
Oh, that's a lie.
you can't do this for an extended length of time. You can only do it for a short period of time. Normally because they forget that that's what they're doing. Reverse tolerance, as the drug destroys tissue, of course, the user becomes more sensitive to the drug and can tolerate less and less of the substance. This happens with alcoholics when they suffer cirrhosis of the liver. A good alcoholic, once they start destroying their liver, all of a sudden they can get drunk faster with less alcohol. Which makes them happy because now
They're saving money.
it saves them money, it saves them alcohol. It's great, it's a great situation. Since the liver doesn't work as well, a little alcohol will get them drunk because the liver is not operational enough to metabolize the alcohol. So if you're a really good alcoholic, it only takes a couple beers.
Hey, I have a question.
Sure.
Well, obviously, drinking, that's a lot of alcohol for
Sure.
everybody. How did my body get yellow? Like what?
Did you turn yellow?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay,
In my, they said it was in my eyes a little bit.
sure.
Like they said I was in danger, first stage cirrhosis,
Right.
but they stuck a thing down there and I just had gastritis.
Gastritis, okay.
But like, how does it get yellow?
How's it get yellow? The liver enzymes. Liver enzymes are yellow. They're bright yellow. So the more enzymes that you're producing to try to dissipate the alcohol, the yellower you get. If you get hepatitis, for example, hepatitis B, your skin will turn yellow, your eyes will turn, the whites of your eyes will turn yellow because of all of these enzymes that you're pumping through your
I had an
system.
old son of Major, he drank a lot. But he was old school too, like I first started on Sunday.
Sure.
But his skin was like almost the color of his dash.
Yeah,
I mean bad. And his eyes looked like a freaking
sure,
creature or something, man. They were all yellow.
right,
Pretty soon, like a month later, he was walking with a freaking cane.
yeah.
Couldn't freaking walk.
Yeah, well, he had destroyed his liver. And as your liver is destroyed, like with hepatitis, your liver is sick, it has an infection, you'll turn bright yellow, as interesting as that is. So when you drink a lot of alcohol, and sometimes you can tell by looking at people's, the whites of their eyes, just how much alcohol they drink. Either they've got, like you had gastritis, or they have hepatitis, or they're a drinker, because their eyes are yellow. And your eyes are, well, I mean, it's white. It's white, so if you have any yellow in there at all, it means you're either sick or you're drunk, or you are a drunk on a relatively regular basis, because you're destroying all of that liver tissue. That's what cirrhosis. Cirrhosis just means dead. It's necrotic tissue, cirrhosis. So when you kill that tissue, all those enzymes from that tissue will get into your system, and now it turns your skin yellow and your eyes yellow, as much fun as that is. So you can usually tell, if you're watching a movie and you see an actor that has the whites of their eyes are yellow, you know they're a drunk. And you see this all the time. You know, there are little indications as to what's going on with this individual. I can remember watching a teenage movie, and this guy, a teenage boy, is swimming, and you can see that his nipples are the nipples of his chest are pooched out. It looks like he's developing breast tissue. But what's happening is, yeah, he's got a fatty lipoma behind his nipple, and that fatty lipoma is created by marijuana usage. So if you watch a movie from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, and somebody takes off their shirt, a lot of times you can tell if they're marijuana smokers by whether they have poochy nipples, that they have fat behind their nipples. It doesn't mean that they're not lifting weights. It means that they're smoking pot. So you get these fatty lipomas behind your nipples, as weird as that is. So you can tell somebody's a drunk by looking at the whites of their eyes, and you can tell if somebody's a marijuana smoker.
Both.
If you got
Yellow eyes
both,
and freaking,
poochy nipples and yellow eyes.
they're just all tore up.
There you go. I mean, it's not very large, it's just that the nipple looks a little bit distended.
Yeah.
Acute tolerance, tachyphylaxis. The brain and the body adapt instantly to the toxic effects of the drug. The tolerance to tobacco occurs this way. You become tolerant very rapidly. The first time you smoke, you probably got sick. Second time you smoke, you're okay. The third time you smoke, now you don't get sick at all. First time you turned green, you wanted to throw up. This is a toxin, you know. Nicotine is a toxin, so it's very common.
How do you say that again? Tachyphylaxis?
Tachyphylaxis.
And that just means acute tolerance?
Yeah. Fast reaction is fast reaction. Phylaxis.
Okay.
You can be anaphylactic.
Oh, okay.
You have a
Okay.
reaction.
Oh, okay,
People who try to commit suicide using barbiturates may experience the same instant tolerance and survive twice the legal dosage. This is something that we see all the time. This is what you hope to see, unless they use a lot of barbiturates, of course, and then this isn't going to happen. So that's one of the reasons why people can commit suicide with barbiturates. If they take it the first time, they'll probably get tachyphylaxis and it won't work. But if they have a tolerance to barbiturates, then of course it will kill them because they won't have this tachyphylaxis.
So it's kind of like an instant tolerance?
Instant tolerance, right. It's such a shock to the system that it just breaks it off. It just arrests it, you know?
Yeah, like protection-wise, right?
Yeah. It's the body trying to protect itself. It's not used to the substance, so it has its reaction is to stop it.
And so that's once it enters the system?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but if they have already built up a tolerance to it, this isn't going to happen. Yeah, okay. And that's what happened with Marilyn Monroe. If Marilyn Monroe didn't use barbiturates to go to sleep every night, and she had taken all those barbiturates and drunk all that champagne, it wouldn't have killed her if she hadn't already built up a tolerance. The same thing happened with Wally Cox. You guys have never seen, he was a comedian on television back in the 50s. But Wally Cox committed suicide with barbiturates and whiskey in his case. LSD will not work if 2 doses are taken close together due to tachyphylaxis. LSD is one of those substances you can't overdose on. You can drink a gallon of the stuff and you'll just have, your reaction will be a single reaction because the rest of it is just passes through the system. Select tolerance, the body develops tolerance to mental and physical effects at different rates. This occurs with opiates and sedatives. With barbiturates, sleep will be induced long after the euphoric effect is no longer present. So barbiturates will knock you out later. The brain chemistry changes so that this is inverse tolerance or kindling. The brain chemistry changes so that the person becomes more sensitive to the effects of the drug. With continued use, cocaine and marijuana users will get a minimal effect, and then after months will start to get an intense reaction. In the case of cocaine, of course, it can kill you. Your heart can seize. So you've been snorting all this cocaine for an extended length of time, then all of a sudden you have a reaction to it. This is very common. Especially people that snort a lot of cocaine, and they will tell you when they come into the emergency room, you know, I do this all the time, and I never have this kind of reaction. But this time, of course, they had a reaction. So, and this is known as inverse tolerance. And of course, you have to explain to them that, well, sometimes that's what happens.
Yeah.
And if they're lucky, they didn't kill themselves. This will happen with marijuana users also. You know, they're smoking a lot of pot, and then all of a sudden, they'll just have an extreme reaction. And of course, they go in, they think they're dying because they smoked their pot, which normally makes them so mellow, dude, and all of a sudden they have this really serious reaction to it. And it scares the shit.
It also depends what kind they're smoking too. No, whether it be sativa or the other one.
Right.
But with coke, like I said, more sensitive to the thing, does it have anything to do with the cut?
No,
No?
no.
So it's
No, it
just,
doesn't have to do with
just a
the
blanket
cocaine.
reason?
No, it's just that your body all of a sudden will have an extreme reaction to the cocaine, like it did at the beginning, potentially.
Oh, she's here to see me.
Just coming to get you?
Well, she's gonna sit with me until class.
Okay. So you're in trouble now?
Kind of.
Yeah, okay. Cross tolerance, if a person develops tolerance for one drug in a family of drugs, they will be tolerant of other drugs in that family, and this is kind of a problem, can be a problem. If you're sensitive to any opioid, you're sensitive to all opioids, so none will have a reaction for you. And now the thing about the opioids, of course, heroin is an opiate. Fentanyl is a different chemical configuration. It's an opioid. So potentially, some things will have cross tolerance and some things won't. Fentanyl, for example. I can't take morphine because it doesn't work, but I can take fentanyl, or fentanyl will knock me out. Of course, it takes a lot, but they can knock me out with fentanyl. Codeine doesn't work on me, but codeine is an opiate. But fentanyl does work, so.
The difference between oid and et.
Oid is synthetic and et is from the opium poppy. What they did, they figured out what the chemical structure of an opiate is, what heroin is, what codeine is.
Yeah.
That's the chemical structure of from the opium poppy. And they created all these synthetics. OxyContin, hydrocodone, they're all synthetics. And sometimes the chemical structure is so similar to the opiate, the opium poppy, that it has a cross tolerance. But sometimes it's very, very different. That's
So
the way it is with fentanyl.
Oid is synthetic.
Yeah, oid is synthetic, and et is the natural structure. Oh, it's a natural drug, we should legalize it. A person tolerant of Xanax will be tolerant of other benzodiazepines. and even the depressant alcohol. So if you build up a tolerance to Xanax, potentially you can go out and get drunk as much as you want because, well, you can go drink as much alcohol as you want because you have a tolerance to it. A person tolerant to barbiturates will be tolerant to benzodiazepines, and this is known as cross-tolerance. So you have to be careful as to what you're taking. And then, of course, the doctors are supposed to know all of this stuff when they tell you that you need to take this medication to lower your blood pressure or whatever. They will know that all of these other medications you're taking aren't accelerating your blood pressure or increasing your blood pressure, so that you don't get a balancing act going on. And of course, the drug isn't working anymore. Tissue dependence, this is the biological change of the body to adapt to the presence of the drug. This usually occurs after prolonged usage. Remember, the human body is trying to balance itself. Allostasis sometimes will occur where the tissues and the organs of the body depend on the drug to be functional. That's the way it is with alcohol. Some people they crave alcohol. They actually have a tissue dependence on that alcohol. If they don't have it, then then they'll have withdrawal symptoms. In these circumstances, cessation of the drug usage will cause dangerous and dramatic withdrawals. And that's the way it is with alcohol. The most dangerous drug to withdraw from is not heroin, it's alcohol. More people die from alcohol withdrawals than any other type of withdrawals. The reason that people don't want to stop using heroin is because it feels so good to take it. You have this euphoric effect. So it's not that the withdrawals are so bad, it's that using it feels so good that they feel that deficit. Alcohol, of course, a lot of people go into seizures when they go through withdrawals. In select circumstances, cross-dependence will occur where dependence of one drug can be alleviated with another drug. And of course, we do this when somebody's going through alcohol withdrawals, we'll give them an antidepressant. And sometimes that will help. Usually that helps. Psychological dependence, addiction used to mean that the person taking the drug was tissue dependent on the drug, and for this reason, of course, we didn't think that cocaine or marijuana was addictive because there was no tissue dependence. We couldn't see it. We didn't know what happened. But what actually happens with cocaine leaves your system so rapidly that you don't have any dependence. Marijuana stays in your system for such a prolonged period of time that actually, if you smoke a lot of pot today, then for the next 28 days, you're slowly going to be dissipating the amount of THC in your system.
But you can still find it in your system.
It's
right?
still in your system, yeah, we can still find it in there. It's still there, and you're still getting a minimal effect from it, but it's still in your system. It stays in your system for an extended length of time. It's fat soluble, so it gets into your fat cells. And since it's in your fat cells, it's slowly coming out. So it's like if you were shooting up with heroin, and for the next 28 days, you're gonna feel that a little bit less euphoria, but it's still in your system. But of course, that stuff is metabolized out of your system. But marijuana doesn't do that. Marijuana stays in your system for an extended length of time. With continued research in brain imaging technology, it has been recognized that psychological dependence is an important factor in addictive behavior. So we know that this is what you're seeking. You're seeking the euphoria of the psychoactive substance. The altered states of consciousness that are caused by select drugs can lead to continued misuse and to avoid life's problems. That's especially what happens with people who smoke pot. One of the things is that they do is that they don't want to do anything. They lack volition. They don't want to do anything.
And what?
When people smoke pot. So
I don't know, man. I've seen people freaking put together engines after they smoke. And that depends on the person, though.
yeah, it really does depend on the person and how much they're smoking. Psychological dependence is now acknowledged that psychological dependence occurs before tissue dependence, and that the response rate from either is similar. Psychological factors that induce reinforcement, drug automatism. Individual uses the drug aimlessly, unconsciously, and repetitively. You get up, you smoke a cigarette, you get up and you take a drink, hair of the dog, you take a shot of whatever. You get up and you smoke marijuana, you get up and you can't wake up until you get a cup of coffee. You have to have that caffeine in your system. This is known as drug automatism. Some people aren't sensitive to caffeine, but they get up. When they get up, they have to drink coffee or they feel kind of off, even though they don't have any effect from caffeine. It's just automatism. If you don't have it, you feel a deficit. So they smoke a cigarette, or they smoke a doobie or whatever, just because they always do it that way. Negative reinforcement, unpleasant states encourage drug usage. Smokers will wake up in the middle of the night to smoke to dissipate their nicotine withdrawals. If you've ever been around a smoker, sometimes they'll just go outside to smoke a cigarette. And it may not be that much since they've had a cigarette, but they just have to do it. They just have to do it.
I used to be like that when I used to smoke. Like, I just, before I go to sleep, right when I wake up, I'd have to have that cigarette.
Have to have that cigarette at 2 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, it's like getting up to pee. It's just an automatic thing. You go urinate and then you smoke a cigarette. And that's negative reinforcement. Social reinforcement, peer pressure, and the need for social inclusion encourages continued use. Why don't we stop right here, and next time I'll talk about opioids and how they affect our system. Shoot up with heroin, as cool as that is.
So my cousin did.